You're sitting in a room, feeling the weight of sadness pressing down on you. Maybe it's been days, weeks, or even months since you felt truly happy and love. Well, that seems like a distant concept, something other people get to experience, but not you. Now, what if I told you there are 9 incredible psychology tricks that could completely change your emotional landscape? 9 tricks that only 1% of people know, but the few who do, they break free from the chains of sadness and find love, not just externally, but within themselves first. And that's where everything starts. If you're skeptical, that's fine, but stay with me. You're about to embark on a journey that will change the way you think about your emotions, your relationships, and most importantly, how you navigate the world. Ready? Now, before we dive in, let's set something clear. Sadness is more than just a feeling, it's a psychological pattern, a loop that our brains can get stuck in. And the reason most people can't escape from it isn't because they lack willpower, it's because they don't understand the tricks their mind is playing on them. The first trick we're going to explore is all about understanding these mental loops and how to break them. The first psychological trick, cognitive reframing. This is a technique that has been studied extensively in clinical psychology. Imagine you're in a dark room and the only thing you can see is a small window in front of you with a terrible storm raging outside. That's your sadness. But what if I told you there's another window in that room, a bigger one, showing a peaceful sunset? The problem is, most people don't even know that a second window exists. Cognitive reframing is about shifting your perspective, finding that other window. A famous experiment by psychologist Aaron Beck, who is considered the father of cognitive behavioral therapy, showed that people who were trained to reframe their negative thoughts experienced significant reductions in depression. Click subscribe to this channel to get more insights into human psychology. You might be thinking, okay, but how do I actually do that well? Here's a practical exercise. Next time you catch yourself in a negative thought spiral, like I'm not good enough or no one will ever love me, pause and ask yourself, is this thought absolutely true? Most of the time it's not. Then, try to come up with a more balanced thought, like I may not feel good enough right now, but I'm working on improving myself. This might sound simple, but it's powerful. Over time, this small shift rewires your brain. Neuroscience shows that our brains are plastic, they change based on how we think. If you practice reframing, you'll start to see the world differently. And that's the first step to breaking free from sadness. But now, let's talk about love. The second trick is self-compassion, and it's not what you think. We often look for love outside ourselves, whether it's from a partner, friends, or family. But what if I told you that the most important form of love is the one you give yourself? Psychologist Christine Neff has done extensive research on self-compassion and found that people who practice it are less likely to experience depression and anxiety. Think about it. How often do you criticize yourself? And how often do you offer yourself kindness? Here's a quick experiment you can try right now. Close your eyes and imagine a close friend standing in front of you, someone you care deeply for. Now imagine they're going through a tough time. What do you say to them? How do you comfort them? Now, replace that friend with yourself. Say those same words to yourself. This is self-compassion in action, and the more you practice it, the more you'll find that the love you've been seeking was inside you all along. But let's go deeper. The third psychological trick is one that only a tiny fraction of people know: emotional labeling. Studies have shown that when we're able to accurately label our emotions, we gain control over them. In a famous experiment conducted by Matthew Lieberman at UCLA, people who were asked to label their emotions showed decreased activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear and anxiety. So next time you're feeling sad, don't just say "I'm sad," try to get specific. Are you disappointed? Frustrated? Lonely? The more precise you are, the less power that emotion has over you. And here's where it gets interesting. When you label your emotions, you're not just identifying them, you're acknowledging them. And when emotions are acknowledged, they start to lose their grip. Okay, we've covered 3 tricks so far. But here's where things get even more fascinating. The 4th trick is one that will surprise you: gratitude. You've probably heard this before: be grateful, it'll make you happier. But did you know that gratitude actually changes the structure of your brain? Neuroscientists at the University of California, Berkeley, discovered that practicing gratitude can boost dopamine and serotonin, 2 neurotransmitters that are crucial for happiness. Here's a quick exercise every day. Write down 3 things you're grateful for. They don't have to be big things. Maybe it's as simple as "I'm grateful for my morning coffee," or "I'm grateful for my friend who texted me." The key is to make this a daily habit. Over time, you'll start to notice a shift in your mindset. This shift doesn't just make you happier, it opens the door to love. But here's where it gets tricky. If you're stuck in sadness, gratitude can feel fake at first. That's normal. The trick isn't to force yourself to feel grateful, it's to start small. Even if you're just grateful for the fact that you're breathing, that's a start. And as you build this habit, you'll start to notice something incredible. You'll feel more connected to the people around you. You'll start to see the love that's already present in your life, and that's when the magic happens. Now, onto the 5th trick: vulnerability. Brené Brown, a researcher who has spent years studying vulnerability, found that the people who experience the most love and connection are the ones who allow themselves to be vulnerable. This might sound counterintuitive. After all, isn't vulnerability weakness? The truth is, vulnerability is the ultimate strength. It's what allows us to connect with others on a deeper level. Think about it. When was the last time you let someone see the real you, flaws and all? Most people are afraid to be vulnerable because they fear rejection. But here's the paradox: the more you hide, the more disconnected you feel. And the more disconnected you feel, the more sadness takes hold. So here's a challenge: the next time you're with someone you care about, try being vulnerable. Share something real: your fears, your insecurities, your hopes. You'll be surprised at how people respond. More often than not, vulnerability leads to deeper connection, and deeper connection leads to love. Now that we've explored vulnerability and how it can lead to deeper connections, let's dive into the 6th psychological trick: the power of social connection. This might sound obvious, but it's often the one thing we neglect when we're feeling sad. Think about it: when you're down, your instinct is often to isolate yourself, right? You avoid social situations because you think no one will understand, or "I'm just going to bring everyone else down." But this is the exact opposite of what you should be doing. Research shows that social connection is one of the most powerful antidotes to depression. A groundbreaking study conducted by Julianne Holt-Lundstad at Brigham Young University found that people with strong social ties are 50% more likely to live longer than those who are isolated. This isn't just about living longer, though it's about living better. One fascinating experiment highlights this even further. Psychologists conducted a study where participants were put in a stressful situation: public speaking, something that triggers anxiety for most people. Half of the participants had a friend in the room for support, the other half were alone. You can probably guess the results. The people with a friend in the room showed significantly lower levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, and reported feeling less anxious overall. What does this tell us? When we connect with others, we buffer ourselves against stress and sadness. So, the next time you feel tempted to shut yourself off from the world, remember this social connection isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity for your emotional well-being. Let's move on to something a bit more intense: exposure therapy. This is the 8th trick, and it's not for the faint of heart, but it's incredibly powerful. You see, one of the biggest reasons people get stuck in sadness is because they avoid the things that scare them. Maybe it's a fear of rejection or failure, or even intimacy. Whatever it is, avoidance only makes the fear stronger. This is where exposure therapy comes in. It's a psychological technique that involves gradually exposing yourself to the things you fear most in a controlled and safe way until the fear loses its power. Here's a real-world example in a study conducted by Edna Foer, a pioneer in exposure therapy. Participants with severe social anxiety were asked to engage in small social interactions, things like ordering coffee at a cafe or making small talk with a stranger. At first, their anxiety was through the roof. But over time, something incredible happened. Their anxiety levels decreased, and they started to feel more comfortable in situations that once terrified them. This is the power of exposure. By facing your fears head-on, you take away their ability to control you. So what's the practical takeaway here? Identify something you've been avoiding because of fear. It could be as small as sending that risky text message, or as big as admitting your feelings to someone. Start small and gradually work your way up. Each time you face your fear, you'll get a little stronger, and sadness will have less of a hold on you. Now, let's talk about the 9th and final trick, perhaps the most profound of all mindfulness and acceptance. This is where everything comes together. Mindfulness is a technique that's been practiced for thousands of years, but it's only recently that science has caught up with what ancient wisdom has known all along. When we resist our emotions, they grow stronger. But when we accept them, they lose their power. Think about it. How often do you fight your sadness? You say to yourself, I shouldn't feel this way, or I need to snap out of it. But what if, instead of fighting your emotions, you simply observed them? What if you allowed yourself to feel sad without judgment? In a study conducted by Zindel Segal, a pioneer in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, participants who practiced mindfulness meditation showed a significant decrease in depressive symptoms compared to those who didn't. Why? Because mindfulness teaches us to stop identifying with our emotions. When you observe your sadness, instead of becoming it, you create space between you and the emotion. You realize that it's just a passing state, not a permanent condition. Here's a simple mindfulness exercise you can try the next time you feel overwhelmed by sadness. Close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. Focus on the sensation of your breath as it enters and leaves your body. Notice how your chest rises and falls. Then, gently bring your attention to the sadness. Where do you feel it in your body? Is it a heaviness in your chest? A tightness in your throat? Just observe it without trying to change it. This is the key. Don't resist it, and don't try to make it go away. Just notice it. Over time, you'll find that the sadness starts to lose its intensity. You'll still feel it, but it won't consume you in the same way. And here's the final piece of advice: acceptance is not resignation. Accepting your emotions doesn't mean giving up. It means acknowledging them without letting them define you. It's about finding peace in the storm, knowing that the storm will pass. And once you've cultivated this sense of acceptance, something amazing happens. You become open to love, both from others and from yourself. You realize that love isn't something you need to chase or earn. It's something that arises naturally when you stop resisting your true self. So, let's recap. We've gone through 9 incredible psychology tricks, from cognitive reframing to self-compassion to emotional labeling, gratitude, vulnerability, social connection, oxytocin activation, exposure therapy, and mindfulness. These aren't just random tips, they're scientifically backed strategies that can help you break free from sadness and open yourself up to love. But here's the thing, knowing these tricks isn't enough. You have to put them into practice. It's one thing to understand the psychology behind sadness and love, but it's another thing entirely to live it. So I challenge you, start small. Pick one of these tricks and practice it consistently. Over time, you'll notice subtle shifts, then bigger ones, until one day you realize that you've completely transformed the way you experience your emotions. Great. Let's dive into the final part of this journey. Now that you've learned these 9 incredible psychology tricks, it's important to understand how they fit together in the grander scheme of your emotional life and relationships. See, when we talk about breaking free from sadness and finding love, it's not just about applying a few tricks here and there. It's about creating a sustainable, long-term shift in how you approach your inner world and your interactions with others. Here's the big insight: sadness and love are 2 sides of the same coin. They are deeply intertwined, and how you navigate one will affect how you experience the other. Let me explain. Sadness often arises when we feel disconnected from ourselves, from others, or from a sense of purpose. Love, on the other hand, is all about connection. So, when you learn how to reconnect with yourself and others, sadness naturally begins to dissipate, and love flows in to take its place. But this isn't just about romantic love. It's about a broader, more expansive love for life, love for your experiences, and love for the people around you. Let's take a deeper look at how some of these tricks you've learned work together to create this transformation. One of the most powerful combinations is self-compassion and vulnerability. Think about it. When you practice self-compassion, you're giving yourself the love and kindness you often seek from others. This creates a foundation of emotional safety within yourself. And when you feel safe, you're more likely to allow yourself to be vulnerable with others. Vulnerability, in turn, is what builds deep, authentic connections, the kind of connections that bring love into your life. But there's more to it than just being kind to yourself and opening up to others. Cognitive reframing plays a crucial role here too. When you combine cognitive reframing with self-compassion, you start to see your struggles in a different light. Instead of thinking, "I'm broken, and that's why I'm sad," you might start to think, "I'm going through a tough time, but that doesn't define me." This shift in thinking is crucial because it prevents you from spiraling deeper into sadness. It's like building a mental and emotional safety net for yourself. And once you have that safety net, you're free to explore deeper connections with others without the fear of falling apart. One of the most interesting psychological experiments that ties into this idea is the scarcity vs. abundance mindset. Studies have shown that people who operate from a scarcity mindset, meaning they believe love or happiness is limited, tend to experience more anxiety and sadness. They're constantly worried that they'll never have enough love, or that if they do find love, it will be taken away. On the flip side, people who embrace an abundance mindset, those who believe that love and happiness are plentiful, tend to be more resilient in the face of adversity and more open to forming meaningful connections. But here's where gratitude comes back into play. Practicing gratitude shifts your brain into an abundance mindset. When you regularly acknowledge the good things in your life, even if they're small, you start to believe that there's more where that came from. This belief changes the way you approach relationships and love. Instead of clinging to people out of fear of losing them, you can appreciate them in the moment, trusting that love and connection will continue to flow into your life. Now let's talk about how social connection and oxytocin activation interact. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth diving a bit deeper because this is where the magic happens. Oxytocin, as we've discussed, is the hormone that helps us bond with others. But here's something fascinating. Oxytocin not only helps us feel closer to others, but it also makes us more empathetic and trusting. This creates a positive feedback loop. The more you connect with others, the more oxytocin you release. The more oxytocin you release, the more open and connected you feel. And the more open you feel, the more likely you are to experience love in its many forms: romantic, platonic, and even self-love. But here's the catch: you have to take the first step. It's easy to wait for others to reach out or for some external event to spark a connection. But the truth is, you have more control over your social connections than you might think. By practicing small acts of kindness, reaching out to friends or loved ones, or even just engaging in deep conversations, you're creating opportunities for oxytocin to flow, for trust to build, and for love to grow. This is why social connection is such a powerful tool in escaping sadness. It's not just about having people around you, it's about actively engaging in meaningful ways that foster a sense of belonging. Now, let's return to mindfulness and acceptance. This is where everything starts to integrate. Mindfulness teaches you to be present with your emotions without judgment. So when you feel sad, instead of trying to push it away or distract yourself, you sit with it. You observe it. You let it be what it is. And in doing so, you realize something profound: emotions are temporary. They come and they go. This realization is incredibly freeing because it means that even when sadness shows up, you don't have to fear it. You can allow it to be there, knowing that it will pass. But mindfulness isn't just about dealing with sadness. It's also about fully experiencing moments of love and connection when they happen. One of the greatest tragedies is that many people miss out on the love that's already present in their lives because they're too caught up in their own thoughts, either worrying about the future or dwelling on the past. Mindfulness brings you back to the present, where love exists. Whether it's the love you feel during a simple moment with a friend, or the love you feel when you're fully engaged in something you're passionate about, mindfulness allows you to experience it deeply. And the more you practice mindfulness, the more you'll notice these moments of love happening all around you. Here's another powerful psychological concept that ties into this flow. Flow is a state of being where you're fully immersed in what you're doing, to the point where you lose track of time. Flow is often associated with creativity or work, but it can also happen in relationships. You've probably experienced this before, when you're so deeply engaged in a conversation with someone that time seems to disappear. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who coined the term flow, found that people who regularly experience flow report higher levels of happiness and life satisfaction. So, how do you cultivate flow in your relationships? By being fully present, by listening deeply, by engaging without distractions. This is mindfulness in action, and it's one of the most powerful ways to experience love. But here's the final piece, something that ties everything we've talked about together: resilience. At the end of the day, escaping sadness and finding love isn't about never feeling sad again. That's impossible. Life is full of ups and downs, and sadness will inevitably show up from time to time. But what these 9 psychological tricks do is build resilience. They give you the tools to navigate sadness when it does arise, and they help you stay open to love even in the face of challenges. Resilience isn't about avoiding pain, it's about bouncing back from it. And the more you practice these tricks, the more resilient you'll become. There was an interesting study conducted by George Bonanno, a clinical psychologist, on resilience. He found that people who showed more resilience weren't necessarily those who had fewer difficulties in life. In fact, many of the most resilient people had gone through significant trauma. What made them different was how they responded to adversity. Instead of letting sadness or hardship define them, they used techniques like cognitive reframing, mindfulness, and social connection to bounce back. They didn't deny their emotions, but they didn't get stuck in them either. And this is exactly what you're learning to do with these 9 tricks. So, as we wrap up this journey, I want to leave you with one final thought. Love isn't something you find, it's something you create. By practicing these psychological tricks, you're not just escaping sadness or waiting for love to show up. You're actively creating the conditions for love to flourish in yourself, in your relationships, and in your life as a whole. And the best part, the more you practice, the easier it becomes. Over time, these tricks will become habits, automatic responses that help you navigate the ups and downs of life with grace and resilience. Now, it's up to you. You have the tools. You have the knowledge. The question is, will you use them? Because if you do, I promise you this, you'll not only escape sadness, but you'll also find a deeper, more meaningful love than you ever thought possible. Thank you for joining me on this journey.